Awkward to call a meeting to order by Zoom because it's just hard to ring the bell. But this week, our Rotary bell is sponsored by Devin McClendon and NAI Nashville. So I'm about to ring our Rotary bell, sponsored by NAI Nashville. Here we go.
Ooh, that's good.
I know, isn't it? I tried all the cups in my whole house, and NAI Nashville won. Right. Good afternoon. I'm Keeley Hall, and I would like to welcome you to this August 21st edition of the meeting of the Rotary Club of Brentwood. I have the privilege of serving as president of this fine club, and I am happy to see you all today. Hunter McCarty has our invocation this morning, followed by Sarah Johnson with the pledge and the four-way test. So we will let Hunter take control of the mic. Hunter, take it away.
Please pray with me. Oh God, you have bound us together in common life. Help us during our struggles for justice and truth, to comfort one another without hatred or bitterness, and to work together with mutual forbearance and respect. Kindle, we pray, in every heart the true love of peace, and guide with your wisdom those who take counsel for the nations of the earth, that in tranquility your dominion may increase until the earth is filled with the knowledge of your love. We remember before you those who suffer want and anxiety from lack of work. Guide the people of this land so to use our public and private wealth, that all may find suitable and fulfilling employment and receive just payment for their labors. Comfort and relieve your sick servants, especially the fiddlers, John Stokes and Roger Wheelwright, and give your power of healing to those who minister to their needs, that those for whom our prayers are offered may be strengthened in their weakness and have confidence in your loving care. We commend to your gracious care in keeping all the men and women of our armed forces at home and abroad. Defend them day by day with your heavenly grace. Strengthen them in their trials and temptations. Give them courage to face the perils which beset them, and grant them a sense of your abiding presence wherever they may be. Give us grateful hearts, our Father, for all thy mercies, and make us mindful of thy needs of others. Amen.
If everyone would please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now, if you please join me in the four-way test of the things we think, say, and do. Number 1, is it true? Number 2,
is it fair at all concerned?
Number 3, will it
Will
build
it build good and better friendships?
And number 4, will it be beneficial
To all concerned?
We certainly hope so.
Certainly hope so.
I'll tell you this. I will be so happy when we're not meeting by Zoom anymore, if for no other reason that we can do the pledge and the four-way test without hearing 9 different people all talking at the same time. I still can't get used to that. All right, now let's see. Jane Covington is actually traveling this week, so Betsy is filling in for Jane, and she will introduce our guests and visiting Rotarians, and we have, if I'm looking correctly, at least one of each that I have seen already today.
Correct. Welcome, everybody. I want to welcome a visiting Rotarian from the Morning Club, Mike Duncan. You want to say hello? Or are you on audio? Okay. Hey, okay. Mike. Okay. And also, Larry Kane has a guest.
Thank you. My guest this morning is Jake. And I don't want to say any more because he's not Jake from State Farm. This is Jake Ingracia. He is the vice president and office and center manager for PNC Bank, which just opened 3 weeks ago down on McEwen in Cool Springs. Jake's been a banker in Franklin for 2 years. He moved here from Cleveland, Ohio with his wife. They just recently closed on a new home in Franklin. And what's interesting is when Jake came here, he brought his horses with him, and they are boarded down in Arrington. So he's a horse person. But I met Jake trying to solicit a sponsorship for him for the golf tournament, and he was very interested in Rotary, and I'm hoping we'll consider being a member. He jumped on here first thing this week, wanting to see what it was all about. So, Jake, we're glad to have you, buddy. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Also, no reason to ask Jake what he's wearing. It's khaki.
You can see it. You can see it. Yeah. Do you want me to stand up?
Are you wearing pants?
I am.
He sounds hideous. Okay, so just kidding. We love you, Jake. We're glad you're here. Any other visiting Rotarians or guests that we have missed that may be joining audio only or anything like that? All right. Let's see, Happy Bucks. Time for Happy Bucks. So now's the time where we go around and we share if we are happy. We put in $1 or $2 via PayPal, or we use our credit card to pay online on the website and share what we're happy for. And I will begin by saying that I'm happy today. I will be very sad in a week or so, but I'm happy today because my daughter is actually going to get to go to college, and we are taking her tomorrow out to California to start her freshman year at Chapman University. Stay tuned. I very well may be announcing next month that she's come back home because they've had a COVID outbreak. We'll see, but I hope not. I hope not. It's a weird, weird year for these college students. So that's why I'm happy today. Who else is happy?
I am.
Larry.
I'll give you a fuller golf report here in a few minutes, but I got a great contact this week from Jane Covington. I wish she was on this morning. She had told me a month or so ago that her original commitment to our golf tournament was $2,500, the same sponsorship that CSX did last year. And she had told me a month or so ago she was going to try to increase that if she could. So I got an email from her yesterday, and CSX is going to be a $5,000 sponsor of our golf tournament. So that was awesome news considering all the other stuff we were trying to do. So thank you, Jane. Thank you, CSX. That's unbelievably good.
Outstanding. Who else is happy?
I'm happy. I got my son off to college this week. They're actually on campus, which is wonderful. But I'm happy because I stopped crying after 2 days of it, off and on, with these mom moments. I totally thought I was going to be relieved having a 19-year-old boy leave my home because, as you know, the last year has been crazy. But we just broke down. We all hugged and broke down out in the parking lot. And I was like, what is happening here? Regroup, regroup, regroup. So we came home. I cried off and on for 2 days while I was trying to work. And then I pulled it together. And now my daughter and I are like, wow, this is amazing. There's, we can spread out, and he's not leaving all his crap behind. And I'm like, this is great. So anyway, now he may be home in a couple we'd like Keely said, because there's already outbreaks happening, but we'll see. But anyway, hooray.
Where do you go?
I'll go. I have a reason to be happy. I was able to spend an entire week with my sons, my daughters-in-law, and my 4 grandchildren last week. And we had not seen them, my wife and I, in person since January. So it was just wonderful. Spent a whole week at the beach, the Jersey Shore, and had a great time. And I'll put $5 in, Keely, because during the course of the time there, we found out that our 5th grandchild is on the way. So we'll have 5 sometime in February. Yep. Thanks.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Yeah. Kelly, I have one. I mentioned earlier to a few of the people that were on in the beginning, and mine, frankly, is not so happy, though I wish them well. But my daughter, husband, and my 3 grandchildren left Sunday, drove to Atlanta, flew Monday to Miami, left Monday evening and flew to London. They are now just outside of Dumfries in Scotland permanently. They have, my daughter's husband's from Scotland, and they have moved back over there. So we are certainly going to miss them, and I'm already scheduling the next trip as soon as I can go there. And they're staying in a small cottage right now in a 14-day quarantine, or as they call it, in jail. Thank you.
There's lots of good stuff this week. Who's next? Anybody else? All right. So I do want to make an announcement. Many of you hopefully have already had a chance to read your email, but I did want to cover this in person, or virtually, just in case. Very sad to say that we are going to need to postpone our September 11th First Responders Picnic. I don't know if it's coming as a tremendous shock to anybody, but still a disappointment nonetheless. The City of Brentwood has said they are not comfortable with their first responders gathering in a group like that yet. So they have asked us to postpone that. We will definitely still do it. It's too important of an event to not do, but it probably will be a few months down the road, perhaps sometime in the spring. We will reschedule that. We will also still do something to recognize our first responders on September 11th. It's just not going to be that awards dinner to honor the officer and the firefighter and the dispatcher of the year. Those will all still be selected, but the awards dinner to present them with their awards will be later on. Also, we are going to be continuing in our Zoom format for a few more weeks at least. We don't have a ton of meetings in the month of September, but we will continue Zoom format through the end of September. And then we have a goal right now of having an in-person meeting on October 2nd. Will in all likelihood be an outdoor meeting, and it will in all likelihood be very much like the ones we had before we went to Zoom only. So we'll have an in-person component, we'll have a Zoom component. We're going to continue to have a Zoom component as long as anybody feels that they would like to utilize it. So there's no reason for us not to continue Zoom format indefinitely, whether we're meeting in person or not. So the idea is that the first Friday in October, we will meet in person. Location to be announced still, all the details to be announced still, but that's what we're headed toward. That's our goal. We do have schools that are trying to head back to school in person. They're kind of phasing those in. If our students are going back to school, our Rotarians can go back to Rotary. But we also understand we have a slightly different demographic. We have a slightly different need. And so we want to be careful and deliberate about that. But man, let's face it. Zoom's not the same as being in person. And I miss seeing you guys in person. I know you miss being together in person. So we're headed that direction. Be patient with us. We're going to try to do it in an intelligent and smart fashion. But we are gonna head that direction. Also, okay, so next announcement, I'm peeking through here. I don't think Michael Kaplan is on, and that is a shame for everyone. Michael, are you here and I'm just missing you? All right, he's not here. So we can talk bad about him behind his back. It's all good. Michael Kaplan called me last Friday afternoon. And I'm just gonna tell y'all, he was really talking some trash about all of y'all. He was talking about how his team is so far ahead of every other team in the golf tournament sponsorship race that there's no hope for anybody to catch him. He was so confident. He was saying something about, I'm going to buy anybody dinner if they can beat our team. We're not going to go to the specifics. I just think that everybody's pride needs to step up at this point. Michael Kaplan is talking trash. Michael Kaplan. Let that sink in for a little bit. All right, so if you don't want to finish second place behind Michael Kaplan, then go seek some golf tournament sponsors. Larry Kane, you've got some things that you need to share on the golf tournament as well. Go ahead, Larry.
Thank you. Real quick, yeah, Michael Kaplan is quite a dynamic team captain, to say the least, and the work he's done has really been outstanding. And I hope somebody does catch him, and he does too. He told me the other day, he said, I don't want to finish first. I'd like to finish second, to think that somebody would jump out there and beat me. So anyway, it's interesting. We are still, if we could get 64 whole sponsors, we might make our budget. So that's kind of where we are. We got 30 days from today is our tournament, and like I said, we got 64, or if we got several more CSX sponsorships like Jane got us, that would really help. But just using whole sponsors alone, 64, get it. We still have right at 100 from last year that have not been turned in. So the possibility is there. We just need to make those calls, and the team captains are working on that. We do have, I want to make a quick announcement. We do have a new sponsorship that just was developed yesterday. It's called the Personal Protection Sponsor. This is a sponsor who will have every player in the tournament will get a mask with the sponsor's name on it, as well as a small bottle of hand sanitizer that they can put on their golf bag. So with the sponsor on it, that I found out has been a pretty hot item in fall golf tournaments. And so we're gonna open that sponsorship up. It's $1,500, but everybody in the tournament will have a mask with your name on it, and we'll also have a bottle of sanitizer. So that's the Personal Protection Sponsorship, a brand new one, and we'll just see what happens with it. So sell those whole sponsors, help us out. That's all I got. Thank you.
Larry, what level is that sponsorship? What's the buy-in price for that?
$1,500. Any other questions?
All right, Larry. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Are we missing any other announcements before we get started with our program today? Cool. All right. So now I shall yield the floor to our esteemed past district governor and recent Rotary International Service Above Self Award winner, Mr. Dick Bowers.
Thank you, Keely, and I'd like to welcome our speaker today, Pat Ryan. Pat was a New York City boy. He loved the city so much that at the age of 17, he said, I'm out of here. And he joined the Navy and volunteered for submarine duty. So during the whole Cold War thing, Pat was aboard nuclear fast attack and ballistic missile submarines. And if you have questions what the difference between those two are, you can ask Tom Carr, because Tom was in the Army, so he knows all this stuff. Pat rose to the rank of Chief Petty Officer, and as anybody who knows anything about the Navy, the Chief Petty Officers are the real people who really do run the Navy. He served in the Western Pacific and then became a Navy intelligence officer after being commissioned in 1982. Served above the aircraft carrier Constellation, and then switched over to the intel side of the Navy and became an intelligence officer, focusing a lot of his efforts on the Middle East, got involved with Al-Qaeda, various other kinds of things that were going on in the sandbox called the Middle East. He retired in 1998 with the grade of lieutenant commander. He is qualified in submarines and is a surface warfare officer, and has received numerous decorations, including 2 Defense Meritorious Service Medals. In 1999, Pat launched a newsletter publishing business on Middle East affairs, and he kept that going to 2006. But in the middle of that time, he founded the Tennessee World Affairs Council in 2007. And he did that in Cookeville because his wife, Connie, whom he met in the Navy, decided she wanted to go home, and Cookeville was the biggest city next to that little village in which she was born in Tennessee. So Pat is the president of the World Affairs Council, and he is the past president of the Cookeville Rotary Club, and we really need to work on him to get him to realize he has a Rotary home, and he just hasn't found it yet. So he's got to come our way, maybe. Pat's married to Connie, as I said. They have 2 adult children. And Pat, as one of my heroes, the Tennessee World Affairs Council is a wonderful institution that is educational, and you all ought to become members. So Pat's going to talk to us today about China, and Lieutenant Commander retired Patrick Ryan, over to you, sir.
Terrific. Thanks, Dick. I appreciate the introduction. I'm very pleased to be with the Rotary Club today. It's always great to be around Rotarians. And Dick, you may get your wish and get me back in the fold. I'm sort of a lapsed Rotarian, but certainly appreciate the service above self of your club, and best wishes on your golf tournament. Thanks to President Keeley Hall for the invitation to be here, and thanks Ambassador Dick Bowers for making this all come together. Today I'm going to talk about China. It's going to be kind of a speed reading Cliff Notes version of what's going on in China. There's a lot to cover. I would just recommend that you dig a little deeper than we get today. We're going to go kind of fast. Before we get into China, I would like to talk just briefly about the World Affairs Council. And as Dick mentioned, we are a educational organization in Tennessee, one of a kind. When I got to Cookeville, I looked around for international activities and there were none. So I started a World Affairs Council. There are 95 of them around the country. We're all independent, but we associate through a network. And there's nothing, no quicker way to extinguish your passion for something than to start a 501c3 nonprofit organization. But we persevered, and the World Affairs Council is now based in Nashville. We do community programs, speaker events. You can see the Russian ambassador Kislyak in the one photo there. That was before he became a celebrity. We had him as a speaker. We bring in foreign ambassadors and others, but since March, we've been Zooming like everybody else, and I'll talk just briefly about that. We do education outreach. We do programs with high school students. We've worked with Ravenwood High School on a program we call World Quest, and we'll continue to invite students from your community and from around the state. As I mentioned, we moved into the Zoom world like everyone else. We do webinars that we record on YouTube and as podcasts, and we have a number of community and education outreach programs all on our website, tnwac.org. You can take a look there. This afternoon, you might miss something because we're about to launch our new website, but persevere and you'll see all the things that we do. For this fall, we are doing a couple of special programs. We want to make sure that people who are going out to vote understand the critical issues. So we launched a project called Election 2020. You can see some of the programs listed there. The full calendar, which runs through November, the end of November, is listed on our website. We're also doing a special program on COVID-19 along with other World Affairs Councils. It's a 2-night program where we are talking to journalists around the world via Zoom, pharmaceutical industry representatives, public health officials, and so forth about COVID. So that's kind of a special program for us, working with others from the network of World Affairs Councils. You may be interested to know that the Tennessee World Affairs Council was actually founded with a grant from the Cookeville Breakfast Rotary Club, the World Affairs Council, and Rotary, at least the Rotary mission of promoting international awareness. We're on similar tracks. So we like to work with Rotary clubs in bringing presentations to Rotary clubs, and also work in their respective communities for assistance in getting students involved in our programs. Just a quick summary. Dick gave a great introduction on who I am and what I do. I didn't actually work with Al-Qaeda as suggested, but I was the terrorism assessment chief for the U.S. Central Command, overseeing U.S. forces in the Middle East, Southwest Asia, and the Horn of Africa. And that was an interesting business. I was there during the Khobar Towers bombing, and was involved in doing some preliminary research into the roots of the organization that eventually became known as Al-Qaeda. Okay, China rising. We're going to talk about China. It's an relationship that the United States is currently in increasing conflict with. And as I said, we're going to do kind of a Cliff Notes, a quick review of how we got to where we are. For those of you who slept through your global politics class in high school, or freshman year in college. Just a reminder that Communist China was established 1949. After World War II, there was a civil war in China that continued through 49 when Mao Zedong consolidated power. The nationalist government fled to Taiwan. China was on the other side of the war in Korea in 1950 and early 50s. When MacArthur approached the Yalu River, China entered the war and created a stalemate that wound up in the armistice that we currently have in the Korean Peninsula. In the 50s, there was a crisis in the Taiwan Straits as Communist China moved against the nationalists. The United States got involved in the blockading and the defense of some of those islands. China became a nuclear power in 1964. In 1971, what was known as ping pong diplomacy, the opening of China began, the Nixon trip to China and the creation of relationships between the United States and China. He visited in 72. We opened formal ties with China in 79. Some rocky roads along the way, the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989, that represented the quashing of democracy in China. Since then, the Chinese people have been relegated to the advancement of their economy and no advancement on the side of democracy. Taiwan held its first free election in 1996, and that's always been a thorn in the side of Beijing, that Taiwan is a democracy and has free elections. They continue to warn Taiwan not to declare independence and consider Taiwan to be a province of China. Normalized trade in 2000, China eventually became part of the World Trade Organization. They currently have emerged as the #2 world economy in terms of some statistics, but and we're going to look at the economic data here briefly, in some categories they are the #1 compared to the United States. In 2011, the United States, after 10 years of terrorism, the war on terrorism, mostly in Southwest Asia, Afghanistan, the Middle East, the Gulf, announced a pivot to Asia in view of the rising confrontation and competition with China, and that involved diplomatic and military reorientation to Southeast Asia. The TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, was a trade agreement negotiated over a long period of time that gave the United States certain advantages compared to China in its economic relationships with Pacific nations. But the TPP became an election issue in 2016, and President Trump tore it up when he took office. Starting in 2018, the United States launched a series of tariffs targeting China. There were counter tariffs launched by China, and that began a trade war, which was hallmarked by a hardline speech that Vice President Mike Pence gave in 2018, outlining the bill of goods that we had with China concerning intellectual property, the currency, the way that the Chinese manipulated their currency compared to other currencies for international trade. And in 2020, in January, there was an announcement of phase 1 of a trade deal, which guaranteed that China would buy a certain amount of agricultural products and so forth. So that's brought us up to date, and I'll mention a couple of concepts as we go through here that might be useful. Water cooler conversation. There was a book by Graham Allison in which he called something that refers to a great power competition, the Thucydides Trap, based on the Greek historian who posited that a rising power would confront a high-level power, and the result would almost always be a war to resolve the rise of a new power. A lot of people have taken that on board as their approach to the China-U.S. competition. Others say that war is not inevitable, but in the last year, the United States, we've seen I think more people turning towards confrontation rather than cooperation with China. Let's look at some of the sources of conflict. China is a rising economic power. You can see just briefly from left to right their economic growth and GDP over the years. Their growth rate has been nothing short of phenomenal over the years. In the second chart, though, you can see that they dropped in the first quarter of this year 6.8%, which was really a startling development for the Chinese economy. But obviously with the pandemic, the Chinese have suffered as much as anyone else. You can see from the two charts on the right, the reliance of the global community on what China produces in terms of electronic components. North America is particularly reliant on China for semiconductors. And a lot of these dependencies tied into the current motivation to decouple or disengage or reshore American manufacturing reliance back to North America, bring the supply chains back, and so forth. So we need to be mindful of the reality of how much we do depend on China before we try to do something that may wind up biting us in the end. The Economist, which is probably the best source of news on the planet, a great weekly news magazine and online source, has something called the Big Mac Index, and this is how they rate powers, some whimsically, but there's something to it in terms of buying power. And you can see on the right-hand chart something called purchasing power parity, and in that category, the Chinese lead the United States, and based on the purchasing power. And if you look at the Chinese market, they can field almost 5 times as many workers compared to the United States in their economy. So their GDP may lag somewhat, but the actual purchasing power is really something that has already passed the United States. Another buzzword that you may hang on to is the BRI, or the Belt and Road Initiative. This was a model put forward in the last decade where China is reinstituting the old Silk Road. You can see on the chart here the connection from China all the way across Central Asia, Southwest Asia into Europe. They actually have a train that runs from Shanghai to London, and they've started shipments along that route. There's also a maritime component and then an Arctic component of this Belt and Road Initiative. And the idea is to expand Chinese markets and also to reach out and bring in the raw resources that China needs to fuel its economy. This has also had a economic dependency component to it. China has worked with countries in Latin America and Africa, providing loans that the countries inevitably would be unable to service the debt, and China has instituted some demands on various countries in response to the failure to live up to their debt payments. So keep in mind that China is actively expanding its markets around the world. This is a direct confrontation with American markets around the world, and it's something that we need to be mindful of in analyzing the competition with China. Political sources of conflict. President Trump and President Xi have met a number of times. You may recall that President Xi was enjoying a slice of chocolate cake at Mar-a-Lago when President Trump shared with him that he had just launched an attack of Tomahawk cruise missiles against Syria, and he was particularly proud of that. But in the interim, apart from a friendly phone call that they had in January concerning the virus, President Trump has increased the rhetoric that China has, specifically the Communist Party of China, has become more of an adversary than a cooperative friend with the United States. So keep your eye on the political rhetoric. Secretary Pompeo has definitely been involved in upping the amperage of the competition with China last month. He gave what may go down as another historic milestone, a speech at the Nixon Library, in which he said that the entire history of our relationship with China, going back to Nixon going to China, and it was no mistake that he gave the speech at the Nixon Library, but he said it was a bankrupt policy, and that the United States was on the wrong footing vis-a-vis China. And both Secretary of State Pompeo and President Trump have taken calling China the Communist Party of China rather than referring to it as China. So they're looking specifically at the party, not the government of China in its proper noun name. Another source of conflict you probably have heard in recent weeks has been Hong Kong. There have been demonstrations for months going on, some of them turning violent, but in any case, very persistent. It started out when the local authorities in Hong Kong sought to change the law so that people arrested in Hong Kong could be extradited to mainland China. That started the demonstrations, which ultimately led to Beijing at their most recent conferences in Beijing, the Communist Party and the government meeting, the parliament meeting. They passed a law, a new security law on Hong Kong. Now, you may recall Hong Kong was a British Crown colony, and in 1997 it was turned over to China under a two-system, one country rule that would be in effect for 50 years, going through 2047. But the passage of the security law basically quashes the freedoms that Hong Kong enjoyed up to this point, and are currently the flashpoint in the political confrontation between the United States and China. We do have some security concerns. You probably have heard about the South China Sea. It's an important piece of real estate in the global commons. It connects trade routes from the Middle East through the Strait of Malacca, through the South China Sea, to Japan and South Korea, and to China for all sorts of shipments, especially petroleum and natural gas. So it's a key waterway, and China is claiming what is known as the 9-dash line, and you can see that in the center map. It's called the 9-dash line because on a map, somebody back in the 1940s drew 9 dashes on a map, and that's what China claimed to be their part of the South China Sea. As you can see, it extends hundreds of miles from China down towards Malaysia, and it counters claims from all these countries on the periphery: Philippines, Malaysia, Vietnam, and so forth. So these claims have festered for years. I can recall I was on a cruiser based in Japan. We would go to the Philippines quite often, and we were mindful of these various claims, Scarborough Shoal, and so forth. However, in the interim, China has built up these islands and militarized them, in some cases using just bare rocks and even shoal water that at high tide was below sea level to bring in material to build up these islands. They built airfields, early warning radars, missile installations, the ability to deploy troops to these islands. So the militarization in the last 10 years has been especially startling. The case between the Philippines and China was adjudicated at the International Court. The Philippines won their claim to Scarborough Shoal and other areas that were off the coast of the Philippines, but China refuses to acknowledge that ruling. Recently, you may have seen in the news that the United States sent 2 aircraft carriers to operate in the South China Sea. It was part of what the Navy calls freedom of navigation operations, where we routinely will send warships to areas that countries have claims that we object to, just to demonstrate that we consider those areas to be global commons and not part of their not legitimate to their claims. The concern is that the Chinese see this as a provocation They have military forces in the area, and that remains a point of contention. Another source of conflict is the ongoing relationship between Taiwan and China. Since the independence or the consolidation of power by the Chinese Communist Party in 1949, Taiwan has been considered a renegade state. It was in the United Nations representative of the people of China up until China was recognized in the 1970s. And it has since lost its diplomatic recognition in the UN and other countries. The United States recognizes it as part of China. We don't have diplomatic relations with them in the true sense in terms of embassies and ambassadors, but we do have an interest in Taiwan, and we do have a relationship with them, including military sales that routinely cause angst in Beijing. I can recall sailing through the Taiwan Straits and seeing a Taiwan warship that came out and rendered honors to us. And we were routinely, when warships meet one another, they dip their flag, and all the sailors topside render a salute. And we didn't recognize Taiwan, so we just sailed on. But it's a continuing irritant to China, and some feel that the consolidation of control over Hong Kong may be just the first phase of a potential military action against Taiwan and Americans. As you can see from the Robert Kagan quote, fellow at the Brookings think tank, Americans may wake up one day and have to decide whether defending Taiwan and going to war with China is something that we're ready to do. Obviously, the pandemic has caused a problem between us and China. We've had some back and forth about their responsibility and their secrecy, the role of the WHO and so forth. So that's one more irritant in the relationship. So what's ahead? Decoupling. There's a big move to go our own way with China, bring back our supply chains, cut the amount of trade we have with China, continue to pursue tariffs where they are seen effective against intellectual property stealing and so forth. There's some folks who believe that we should reform the relationship, be realistic but not confrontational. And then there's the Thucydides Trap, which nowadays when we're in this level of confrontation with China, there could be some concerns about that. So that's what's going on with China. I appreciate your interest in that, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take questions.
Hey Pat, there's a couple of questions here that I can throw out, and then if anybody has any others, put them in the chat room or raise your hand. Sarah Johnson wants to know, how large is China's military compared to the U.S. Armed Forces?
The force composition, the correlation of forces is really not analogous. They have a very large standing army compared to ours in terms of numbers of men. I believe it's in the 1.5 million range. But if people talk about the correlation of force between elements that would be confronting one another. The United States has 11 aircraft carriers. The Chinese have 1. Their submarine force is not as expansive as the United States submarine force. Their strategic missile force is not as large as ours, but it is growing. They've developed more modern and range nuclear missiles. So their strategic forces are potent, but nowhere near the level of our ballistic missile force, our bomber force, or our land-based missile force. The primary concern would be a maritime confrontation in the Western Pacific, and they've increased their lethality of their submarine force and their surface forces and their air forces that would pose a considerable opposition to the U.S. Pacific Fleet and our allies in the Western Pacific. So it's not a straight-on numbers and expenditures, but you have to look at the realm of where force on force would be employed.
All right, Tom Carr's got a question. It says he's visited China a number of times or something, and he's wondering how they can ever match or surpass us because of the large and widespread corruption within both their government and their economy. It's almost a part of their culture, he says, and one would think that it would hamper them compared to us. Comments?
Well, I think corruption around the world is an increasing problem. And we are not immune to that. But in the case of China, the Communist Party in recent conferences has put corruption on the top of their list. Xi Jinping, when he came to power, made fighting corruption his #1 mission. If you catch the latest edition of The Economist, there's an article about the new economic policy in China called Xi-onomics, sort of like Abenomics or economics. President Xi puts corruption as one of the primary things that the Communist Party is looking to quash. If you look at the increase in GDP and what they've done building a modern society, I was a naval intelligence officer in the Western Pacific for many years and had only briefly visited part of China. And when I went to Beijing for the first time and Shanghai and just saw what they had done in expansion, even with the corruption there, the growth there has been spectacular.
All right, guess where the Rotary International Convention is next year, Pat? It's Taiwan. So the question is there anything that Rotarians should be mindful of regarding travel to that country as we all pack up and go to visit Taiwan?
Bring your Kevlar. I would, I'm sure as the time approaches, we'll have a better understanding of where the relationship is going. Whether or not there's a new administration in January, that might portend a change in the relationship. But I think Taiwan is definitely a key point of interest, and we should all be watching what's going on there and watching what signals America sends, whether we're just going to watch what happens there like we did with Hong Kong and not raise any ire over it, or if we're going to stick to our commitment, even though it's ambiguous, to aid in the defense of Taiwan.
So the economic slowdown that you highlighted in one of your slides, what kind of impact is that going to have on the support of the Chinese people to the government?
I think it's temporary. We've already seen a bounce back, even in places like Wuhan. They've done an extremely effective job in quelling the coronavirus, and the economy is bouncing back. The key question is going to be the reaction of the United States. We're not buying as many goods. China is a production-oriented, export-oriented economy. So even though they're bouncing back internally, there's still a lot of question marks as to what the world's going to be doing vis-a-vis China.
All right, one final question. Bob Searcy asks, what advice would you give to President Trump re China?
I would suggest that the United States government get together with all of the experts from Congress and think tanks and national security structure and put together a strategy. Right now, Secretary Pompeo is lobbing hand grenades into the relationship and no discernible path ahead. China's not going to go away. We're not going to look the other way in the Western Pacific. So we need a plan that avoids confrontation. There's certainly tripwires that could involve military force, and Dick, that people who have military experience are the last ones who want to see conflict break out anywhere. So my advice would be let's get a strategy that points more towards sorting out the confrontation and find out the areas where we can cooperate. Clearly, we have issues with China, the Uyghurs. We didn't get into that, but Taiwan, Hong Kong, trade. There's an assortment of issues. but there's also areas where we can find cooperation. So I would suggest finding sources of cooperation.
Okay, Pat, thank you very much. Very good. Keely, over to you, sir.
Can I add just one more comment? Again, the Tennessee World Affairs Council is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. I invite people in the area to become members. Go to tnwac.org, or to make a gift, go to the same website, tnwac.org. We exist on leaves and twigs and low-hanging fruit. So we encourage people to become members and help us pay our bills. We do spend a lot of money on students, including those in your neck of the woods. So we'd appreciate if the club has any kind of program that supports the sorts of things we do. We'd appreciate getting involved with that as well. Thank you again for your interest. Always happy to come back and talk about North Korea, Iran, wherever the next black hole is going to be.
Thank you, Pat, for speaking to us. That was fascinating, and I think we'd love to have you back on a variety of topics. Let's for the club, let's remember the Fiddlers, the Stokes, the Wheelwrights. I saw Roger on earlier. I don't know if he's still on, but thinking about you guys and your families, and keep them in your prayers. Are there any other announcements from club members before we adjourn? All right. Well, I will be traveling next week. As I said, we're taking my kiddo to college. So Betsy Crossley will be trying her hand at presiding over a meeting. Little early for president-elect year, but she's game, so she's going to give it a try. Y'all be you be nice to Betsy.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, don't think it's the first meeting she's presided over. Fair.
You got her fair share of presiding over meetings. I did joke. I think there's a real good chance after she presides over a meeting next week, you may never have me back again, which, you know, that would be okay. So be nice to her. Y'all have a good week next week, and I will see you thereafter. If there's no other business for the good of Rotary, y'all be safe and be healthy and keep serving. And here we go, the closing bell, sponsored by NAI of Nashville.